When Morris's Carver walked through the tall glass doors of Cedar Ridge Country Club on the second Tuesday of October, the woman behind the membership desk looked at his shoes before she looked at his face. That was the first mistake. The shoes were old, genuinely old. Brown leather, cracked across the toe, the left heel worn down on the outside the way a heel wears when a man has walked a long time in one direction. He had on a gray hoodie with the cuffs pushed up and a pair of jeans that had been washed too many times to remember their original color. No watch, no chain, no security trailing him through the lobby. 3 championship rings, sitting in a safe at home. A business empire worth nearly $900 million. A face that half the country would recognize in a gas station parking lot. But Diane Whitfield did not see any of that. She saw the shoes. She let her eyes travel up from them slowly, the way you read a sign you have already decided you do not like. "Can I help you?" she said. It was not really a question. "I'm here to look around," Maurice said. "This is a private club, sir." A small pause on the word, sir. "And we do have a dress standard. Those," she gestured at his feet without looking down again, "those aren't going to work here." And Maurice Carver stood there and said absolutely nothing. He did not argue. He just let his eyes move, slowly, the way they always moved when a room thought he wasn't paying attention. The first thing he noticed was the date carved into the stone above the main entrance. Established 1948. He looked at it one beat longer than a man looks at a number that means nothing to him. The second thing was the long hallway behind the desk, lined with framed black and white photographs, founders in golf sweaters, a clubhouse half built, and down at the end, almost in shadow, a photo of 11 young black men in caddy bibs standing in a crooked line on the first tee, squinting into a sun that had set 60 years ago. Maurice's gaze stopped on the third face from the left and stayed there. The third thing was a sound. Out past the windows, on the wide green lawn, a groundskeeper had been raking a sand trap. When Maurice crossed in front of the glass, the man stopped. Just stopped. The rake hung still in his hands, and his head turned and tracked Maurice the whole length of the window, like a compass finding north. The fourth thing was a glass display case beside the trophy wall. Inside it sat a single pair of caddy's spikes, leather, hand-stitched, the soles worn paper-thin. Every other item in that case had a small brass plate. This one had an empty slot where a plate should have been, the screw holes still there, the name long gone. Maurice looked at the empty slot. He did not react. He kept moving. "I'd still like to look around," he said. Diane sighed through her nose. "I can give you 5 minutes." Now here is the part that nobody at Cedar Ridge understood yet. This was not the first time Maurice Carver had stood in this building, and the shoes on his feet were not just old shoes. They were not even his shoes, originally. They belonged to a man who had been dead for 31 years. A man whose face was in that photograph at the end of the hall, and whose name had been quietly removed from a brass plate in a glass case sometime in the last few decades. What Diane Whitfield had no idea about was one single fact. And trust me, you are not going to see this ending coming, even though it was always sitting right there in the case the whole time. So stay with us for the whole video, because by the end of this story, you're going to understand exactly why a man worth nearly $1 billion got in a car, drove 210 miles, put on a pair of dead man's shoes, and walked into a building knowing that he was going to be told he did not belong. He had been carrying the reason for 31 years. He had decided 3 weeks ago to finally set it down. Maurice Carver was born in a mill town called Eaton Springs, the kind of place where the whole economy was one factory and the whole sky was one color. His mother, Della, was a small woman, 5'2" in shoes. But there was something inside her, built out of rebar. And everyone in that town knew it. Della cleaned houses on the north side and came home with her hands cracked from other people's dishwater. And she never once let Maurice apologize for being big or loud-footed or hungry. She had one sentence she said so often that it stopped being advice and became the architecture of him. You let folks tell you your size, baby, and you'll be small the rest of your life. His own father had left before Maurice could form a memory of his face. So the man who raised him, the man whose shoes he was wearing right now in the lobby of Cedar Ridge, came into his life when Maurice was 7. His name was Eldridge Lanier. Everyone called him Pop. Pop was tall and slow-spoken, and his hands were enormous. And he had spent the best years of his young life as a caddy at a country club 200 miles south, carrying golf bags for men who tipped him in coins and called him boy until he was 40. He worked those grounds for 9 seasons. He knew every break of every green. He could read a putt better than any member who ever played there. And in all that time, he was never once allowed to walk in the front door, never allowed to sit in the dining room, never allowed to become a member of the club he kept beautiful with his own 2 hands. He left that job in 1969 with a pair of resoled spikes and no bitterness that he ever let a child see. Pop did not raise Maurice on anger. He raised him on patience. He had one rule, and he said it on the porch, in the car, at the dinner table, the night before every championship game Maurice ever played. You don't argue with people who can't see you yet. You wait until they can. Maurice did not understand it as a boy. He understood it as a man. By 20, he was the most dominant player anyone had seen in a decade. By 26, 3 rings. By 30, he had done the smartest thing a tall man ever did. He had stopped letting people manage his money and started managing it himself. Logistics companies, real estate, a chain of physical therapy clinics in towns like the one he grew up in. By 45, he was worth more than the entire net worth of every member who had ever called Pop Boy combined. Pop did not live to see most of it. He died when Maurice was 24, sitting in his recliner with a crossword half finished, and the last thing he handed his son was a brown paper bag with those shoes inside and a note that said only, "For the days you'll need to remember who walked first." Maurice had worn them 11 times in 31 years, only on days that mattered. This was the 12th. Diane Whitfield was 54 years old, and she had not always been the kind of woman who looked at a man's shoes before his face. She had grown up 40 minutes from Cedar Ridge in a house with a leaking roof, and at 19 she had wanted, badly, to design rooms, to take ugly spaces and make them feel like somewhere you were allowed to be. She had a folder full of magazine clippings. She had a plan. The plan did not survive contact with her life. Her mother got sick the year Diane was supposed to leave for school, and somebody had to stay, and that somebody was always going to be her. Then there was a husband, and then there wasn't. Then there was a long stretch of jobs that paid almost enough. The membership desk at Cedar Ridge was the first place in 20 years that had felt like hers. She had given it 11 years. She knew every member's drink, every member's grandchild's name, which couples were quietly divorcing and which ones pretended not to be. The club was failing. She knew that better than anyone because she was the one who watched the renewal checks stop arriving. And 3 weeks ago, the board had told the staff that the club had been sold to an investment group and that the new ownership wanted Cedar Ridge to elevate its membership image and that there would be a review of every position. A review at 54, with a mortgage and no folder of magazine clippings anymore. She had gone to bed the night before, staring at a water stain on her bedroom ceiling, shaped like the state of Ohio, doing the math the way frightened people do at 2 in the morning. Months of savings against months of bills. The number getting smaller every time she ran it. So when a large man in a torn hoodie and cracked shoes walked into the lobby that she was suddenly desperate to keep, something old and scared rose up in her. And she reached for the one kind of power a frightened person can still grab. The power to decide who does not belong. She said the words before she had fully decided to say them. Those aren't going to work here. The second they left her mouth, some part of her knew they were the wrong words. She just didn't know yet how wrong. It was 11:40 in the morning when a kid named Tyrell Hayes came in from the cart barn to refill the water cooler in the lobby. Tyrell was 19. He had been working at Cedar Ridge for 6 months to save for community college, and he had not yet learned the thing the older staff knew, which was who to be invisible to. He saw a big man standing alone by the trophy case with no chair and no water and a tired look around the eyes. And he did the thing nobody asked him to do. He pulled a chair over. He filled a cup. "You want to sit, sir? It's a long lobby." He had no idea who Maurice was. He was just a kid who'd been raised right. "Thank you, son," Maurice said, and looked at him a second too long. The way you look at someone who reminds you of who you used to be. Across the room, near the dining room doors, a different scene was playing out. A man in coral golf trousers and $300 of sweater had walked in 2 minutes ago, and Diane was already at his side, laughing at something, touching his arm, calling him Mr. Prescott and asking after his wife. Within 4 minutes of his arrival, she had him a drink, a tea time, and a promise. She had not yet brought Maurice his 5 minutes. In a wingback chair by the window sat a woman named Eleanor Faulkner, 71 years old, a retired school teacher who had been a member since her husband was alive, and who came every Tuesday to read in the light. She had watched the whole thing. The shoes, the sir, the boy with the water, the coral trousers. Over the top of her book, she had not said a word. Out on the lawn, the groundskeeper, Walter Boyd, had stopped raking entirely. He had set the rake against the trap. He was walking slowly back toward the clubhouse, wiping his hands on his pants, his eyes fixed on the glass and the big man behind it, his mouth slightly open like a man trying to remember a song he hadn't heard in 50 years. Tyrell, refilling the cooler, glanced at Maurice's shoes, then at his face. Something flickered. He opened his mouth. "Hey, aren't you Tyrell?" Diane's voice sharp from across the lobby. "Cart barn, now." And the boy went. It was Walter who broke it. He came through the side door still wiping his hands, and he stopped a respectful 6 feet from Maurice, and his voice came out rough and uncertain. "Those are caddy shoes," Walter said. "Lanier's pattern, hand-stitched vamp. I'd know that stitch anywhere." His eyes went wet at the edges. "You family?" The lobby got quiet in pieces. First, the conversation by the dining room stopped. Then Mr. Prescott in his coral trousers turned to look. Then Eleanor Faulkner closed her book, slowly, keeping one finger inside to hold her place. Forks stopped moving in the dining room beyond the glass. A man at the bar set his glass down without finishing the sip. Diane felt the temperature of the room change and did not understand why. Something moved behind her eyes that was not quite shame and not quite panic, but lived uncomfortably close to both. "Walter," she said too brightly, "do you need something?" But Walter wasn't looking at her. He was looking at Maurice. "He carried for me my first season," Walter said, "to no one and everyone. I was 16. He taught me how to read the 8th green. They took his name off that case in '91 when they redid the trophy room. I asked him why, and nobody had an answer. And now you are going to want to know what happened next. You are going to want the reveal right now. But before you hear what Maurice Carver did, you need to feel the full weight of what it cost him to walk in here on purpose and be made small in a lobby, so that he could finally, after 31 years, do the one thing his father was never allowed to do in his whole life. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The entire room held its breath. Maurice reached into the pocket of his old hoodie and took out a single folded sheet of paper. He did not raise his voice. He did not stand any taller than he already was. He simply unfolded the page and held it out, not to Diane, but to the room. As of 9 o'clock this morning, he said, the investment group that purchased Cedar Ridge finished its acquisition. I'm the sole owner of that group. He let it sit for one full second. I own the building you just told me my shoes weren't good enough for. Diane's hand found the edge of the desk. He turned then and walked to the glass display case, the one with the empty brass slot, the screw holes, the worn thin spikes, and he laid his palm flat against the glass. These were his, Maurice said. Eldridge Lanier, Pop. He carried bags on this course for 9 seasons. He could read every green out there with his eyes closed. And in 9 years, they never once let him through the front door. He looked at the photograph at the end of the hall, the third face from the left. I didn't buy this club for the golf. I've never played a round in my life. I bought it because 31 years ago, a dying man handed me his shoes and told me to remember who walked first. That was the convergence the whole room had been standing inside without knowing it. The old photograph, the empty name slot, the groundskeeper who froze at the glass, the spikes in the case. None of it was decoration. It was all one story, 60 years long, waiting for the man wearing the matching shoes to walk back in and finish it. The club that turned Pop away at the door now belonged entirely to Pop's boy. Diane Whitfield was crying without sound, the way people cry when they have understood too many things at once. And here is what Maurice did. He did not fire her. He did not raise his voice or make a single person clap. He walked over to the desk, slid the deed into his pocket, and said quietly, so only she could hear, "You were scared of losing this place. I read it on you the second I walked in. Fear makes people reach for the wrong kind of power." He paused. "I'm keeping the staff, all of it. But you're going to help me do something. There's a name going back in that case by Friday, and a caddy scholarship getting started in it. And I need somebody who knows every inch of this building to run the membership the way it should have been run from the start. That's you, if you want it." Pop would have said, "Everybody gets to be a response instead of a reaction, even you." Then he found Tyrell, who had crept back to the lobby door. "You brought a stranger a chair when nobody told you to," Maurice said. "Your tuition's covered, full ride, and you're the first name on the Eldridge Lanier Caddy program. You'll run it one day if you want it." Eleanor Faulkner stood up from her wingback chair, crossed the lobby on her cane, and said the one thing she had been saving all morning. "I've been a member here 40 years, she said. "And that's the first time this room ever did something I'm proud of." Pop had been right all along. You don't argue with people who can't see you yet. You wait until they can. They could see him now. So look at what one Tuesday changed. A woman who reached for the wrong power because she was afraid, and who got handed a second chance instead of a punishment. A 19-year-old who gave away a chair and got given a future. An old groundskeeper who finally got to say a name out loud that the building had tried to erase. A retired teacher who got to be proud of a room. and a man worth nearly $1 billion who drove 210 miles to put a dead man's name back where it belonged. His mother told him once, "You let folks tell you your size, baby, and you'll be small the rest of your life." Maurice Carver never let them, and neither should you. Somebody asked him on the way out why he was still wearing those beat-up old shoes. He looked down at them. He smiled. These were Pop's. If you've ever been judged by what you were wearing instead of who you are, drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from. We read every single one. If this story moved you even a little, hit that like button, because it helps stories about quiet dignity reach the people who need them. And if you believe the people who walked first deserve to have their names put back, subscribe and join this community. There are a lot of us, and we're not small. Your next story is already waiting right on your screen. We will see you there.